May all mother sentient beings, limitless as space, have happiness and the causes of happiness. May they be free of suffering and the causes of suffering. May they not be separate from the sacred happiness that is free of sorrow. May they rest in equanimity, free of attachment and aversion.
The unsurpassed, profound, and wonderful Dharma is difficult to encounter in hundreds of millions of eons. I now see and hear it, receive and uphold it, and I vow to fathom the Tathagata's true meaning. Chapter 7. Key Events. When he had gotten the teaching from Huang Mei, the master went back to Cao Ho village in Shao province, where no one knew him. A certain Confucian gentleman, Lu Che Lu, treated him courteously and was very considerate to him. Che Lu had a mother-in-law who had become a nun by the name of Wu Qinzang, or inexhaustible treasury. She constantly recited the great Sutra of Nirvana. After listening for a while, the master knew the subtle meaning and began to explain it to her. Scroll in hand, the nun then asked about a character. The master said, "I don't know characters. Please ask about meaning." The nun said, "If you don't even know the characters, how can you understand the meaning?" The master said, "The subtle principles of the Buddhas have nothing to do with written characters." Startled, the nun found him unusual. She told all the old worthies in the village, "This is a man who has the way. We should invite him to accept our support." A certain Cao Shu Liang, who was a great-great-grandson of the martial lord of Wei, Cao Cao, eagerly came to behold the master and pay him respects, as did the local people. Now the ancient monastery of Pao Lin, or Jewel Forest, which had been abandoned after being razed in the wars at the end of Sui dynasty, was rebuilt on its old foundations, and the master was invited to live there. All at once, it became a religious center. The master had lived there for 9 months and some days. When he was driven out by a faction of ill-wishers once again, the master hid in the mountain in front of the monastery, but they set fire to the woods and underbrush. The master escaped by squeezing in among rocks and concealing himself there. There are still marks on the rocks from the master's knees as he sat there, as well as the pattern of the fabric of his clothing. Thus they have come to be known as the Rocks of Escape. Remembering the 5th Grand Master's instructions about stopping and hiding at Hui and Hui, the master wound up in these 2 regions, sometimes active, sometimes in hiding. The monk Fa Hai was a man of Chuqiang in Shao province. When he first called on the Grand Master, he asked, "Please teach me how mind itself is Buddha." The master said, "When preceding thought is not conceived, that mind is itself. When succeeding thought is not extinguished, that is being Buddha. Determining all appearances is mind. Detachment from all appearances is Buddha." If I were to explain in full, I would never finish. Even if I spoke until the end of time, listen to my verse. Mind itself is called insight. Being Buddha is stabilization. When stability and insight are equally maintained, consciousness is at peace. Understanding this teaching depends on your habitual character. Its function is basically birthless. Twin cultivation is correct. Fa Hai was greatly enlightened at these words. He eulogized in verse, "The mind itself is originally Buddha. Not realizing we hinder ourselves. I know the basis of stability and insight. Cultivating both, I detach from all things." The monk Fa Ta was a man from Hong province. He had left home at the age of 7 and constantly recited the Lotus Sutra. When he came, he bowed to the master without his head touching the ground. The master chided him, "If you bow without reaching the ground, how does that compare to not bowing at all? You must have something on your mind. What have you learned?" He said, I have recited the Lotus Sutra as many as 3,000 times already. The Master said, if you recite it 10,000 times and get the meaning of the sutra without considering this to be superiority, then you are a fellow traveler with me. At present, you are conceited about this formal practice, totally unaware of your error. Listen to my verse. Bowing is originally to break the banner of pride. Why should one's head not reach the ground? When you have ego, faults then occur. Forget your achievement and blessings are peerless. The Master also said, what is your name? Fa Ta replied, Fa Ta, arrival at truth. The Master said, your name is Fa Ta, but when have you ever arrived at truth? Ta Fa. Then he uttered another verse. You are now named arrival at truth, and diligently recite without cease. If you recite in vain, you just follow sounds. One who clarifies mind is called bodhisattva. Because you have affinity now, I now explain for you. Just trust in Buddha without words, and lotuses will bloom from your mouth. After listening to this verse, Fa Ta apologized and said, hereafter, I will be modest and respectful towards all. I have been reciting the Lotus Sutra without having understood the meaning of the scripture, and have also had doubts in my mind. Your wisdom is so great. I wish you would briefly explain the principles in the sutra. The Master said, Fa Ta, the teaching is quite masterful, but your mind has not attained mastery. There is originally nothing doubtful in the scripture. Your mind doubts on its own. You recite this sutra. What do you consider its basis? Fa Ta said, I am dull and slow. All along I have just recited the words literally. How would I know the basic import? The Master said, I am illiterate. Recite the sutra for me, and I will explain it for you. Fa Ta then recited the sutra out loud, until they came to the chapter of metaphors, when the Master said, stop. This sutra is based on emergence in the world for a cause. Though it presents many kinds of metaphors, none go beyond this. What is the cause? The sutra says, the Buddhas, the world-honored ones, only appear in the world for one great cause. The one great cause is the knowledge and vision of Buddhahood. People of the world, lost in externals, get fixated on appearances. Lost inwardly, they get fixated on emptiness. If you can be detached from appearances while in the midst of appearances, and be detached from emptiness while in the midst of emptiness, then you will not be lost inwardly or outwardly. If you realize this truth, your own mind opens up in an instant. This is called opening up the knowledge and vision of Buddhahood. Buddhahood is equivalent to awakeness. It is divided into 4 aspects. There is opening up awake knowledge and vision, showing awake knowledge and vision, realizing awake knowledge and vision, and entering into awake knowledge and vision. If you hear the opening and the showing, and are able to realize and to enter, then the original real nature of awake knowledge and vision actually becomes manifest. Be careful not to misconstrue the intent of the sutra, supposing that when it speaks of opening, showing, realizing, and entering, it is referring to the knowledge and vision of Buddhas of which people like us have no share. If you interpret this way, you are slandering the sutra and reviling the Buddhas. Since Buddha was already enlightened, he already had knowledge and vision. Why would there be any more need to open them up? You should believe now that the knowledge and the vision of Buddhas are just your own mind. There is no other Buddha besides. It was because all people had covered up their own light, greedily craving material objects and appearances, were inwardly disturbed by external conditions and accepted compulsiveness, that they rousted the world-honored one out of meditation to exhort them with various intense speeches to rest and not seek externally. so they could be the same as Buddha. That is why the sutra speaks of opening the knowledge and vision of Buddhahood. I also urge all people to always open the knowledge and vision of Buddhahood in their own minds. But worldly people are perverted in mind, foolish and deluded. They commit crimes. Their talk may be good, but their hearts are bad. Greedy, irritable, envious, obsequious, devious, conceited, unjust, and destructive. They open the knowledge and vision of ordinary people for themselves. If you can rectify your mind, it will always produce wisdom. Observe your own mind, stop evil, and do good. This is opening the knowledge and vision of Buddhahood for yourself. You should open the knowledge and vision of Buddhahood moment to moment. Don't open the knowledge and vision of ordinary people. Opening up the knowledge and vision of Buddhahood is transcending the world. Opening up the knowledge and vision of ordinary people is being mundane. If you just laboriously keep reciting and consider that an accomplishment, how is that different from a yak admiring its tail? Fa Ta said, "Does that mean I shouldn't bother to recite the sutra as long as I can understand the meaning?" The master said, "What's wrong with the sutra? How can it obstruct your mindfulness? It is just that delusion and enlightenment are in the individual. Loss and gain depend on oneself. If you recite it and also act on it mentally, then you are reading the sutra. If you recite it and don't practice it mentally, then you are being read by the sutra. Listen to my verse. When the mind is deluded, the lotus of truth reads it. When the mind is enlightened, it reads the lotus of truth. If you recite the scripture a long time without understanding, you become an enemy to its meaning. Thought without thought is correct. Thought with thought becomes false. When with and without are both out of the question, you always ride the white ox-drawn vehicle." Hearing this verse, unawares Fa Ta wept. Under the impact of the words, he was greatly enlightened. He told the master, "All these years, I have really never read the Lotus of Truth, but have been read by the Lotus of Truth." Then he added, "The sutra says, even if the great disciples and the bodhisattvas all exhaust their thinking in a collective effort to figure it out, they cannot fathom the knowledge of the Buddha. Now if you get ordinary people to just understand their own minds and call that the knowledge and vision of Buddhahood, unless one has superior faculties, one could hardly avoid doubt and repudiation. Also, the sutra speaks of 3 vehicles drawn by a goat, a deer, and a white ox. How are they differentiated? Please give me some more clear explanation." The master said, "The intent of the sutra is clear. It's just that you are turning away from it in confusion. The people on the 3 vehicles cannot fathom the knowledge of Buddha because the problem is in trying to figure it out. Even if they use all their thinking collectively to figure it out, that adds an even greater distance. Buddha originally articulated this principle for ordinary people, not for Buddhas. Any who refuse to believe may leave, but they still won't realize they are already sitting in the white ox-drawn vehicle, yet still looking for the 3 vehicles outside the door. Indeed, the scripture clearly tells you there is only one vehicle of Buddhahood, no other vehicle, no 2 or 3. The countless expedients, various stories, metaphors, and expressions, these teachings are all for the sake of the one vehicle of Buddhahood. Why do you not realize that the 3 vehicles are provisional, being for the past, while the one vehicle is real, being for the present? I am only teaching you to leave the provisional and return to the real. After you return to the real has no name either. You should know that all the valuables and all the wealth belong to you, and their use depends on you. Don't conceive the idea of the Father anymore, or the idea of the Son, or the idea of the use. This is called holding the Lotus of Truth Sutra. Age to age, the scripture never leaves your hands. Day and night, you're never not invoking it. Edified, Fata was overjoyed with a verse he eulogized. 3,000 recitations of the sutra disappeared at one statement of Cao Qi. Without understanding the transmundane message, how can lifetimes of madness be stopped? The goat, deer, and ox are expedient setups. Beginning, middle, and end are skillfully expounded. Who knew that inside the burning horse has been the monarch of the teachings all along? The master said, hereafter you can appropriately be called a sutra reciting monk. Henceforth, Fata attained the mystic message and also continued to recite the sutra. The monk Chit Tong was a man of On Fong in Shao Province. First, he read the Lankavatara Sutra more than 1,000 times. Yet, he did not understand the 3 embodiments and 4 knowledges. Paying respects to the master, he sought an explanation of their meanings. The master said, as for the 3 embodiments, the pure embodiment of reality is your essential nature. The fulfilled embodiment of reward is your knowledge. The 1,000, 100 million-fold embodiment of projections is your activity. If you speak of 3 embodiments apart from your original nature, this is called embodiment without knowledge. If you realize the 3 embodiments have no independent nature, you will clarify enlightenment with 4 knowledges. Listen to my verse. Our own nature contains the 3 embodiments. When brought to light, they become the 4 knowledges. Without departing from objects of sense, you rise transcendent to the stage of Buddhahood. Now I have explained for you. Trust with certainty and you will never be confused. Do not emulate those who seek frantically, who spend all day talking about enlightenment. Chit Tong spoke up again, saying, may I hear about the meanings of the 4 knowledges? The master said, once you've comprehended the 3 embodiments, you understand the 4 knowledges. Why do you still ask about them? If you talk about the 4 knowledges apart from the 3 embodiments, this is called knowledge without embodiment. This is having knowledge that turns out to be no knowledge at all. Then he uttered another verse. The knowledge like a mirror is purity of nature. The knowledge of essential quality is mind without sickness. The subtle observing knowledge sees without effort. The knowledge of practicalities is the same as the mirror. 5 and 8, 6 and 7 transform in effect and cause. If you just use names and words, there is no reality. If you do not keep feelings on the transformation, you'll flourish and be ever in the dragon stability. Chit Tong suddenly realized essential nature, realized essential natural knowledge, and presented a verse. The 3 embodiments of basically my own being, the 4 knowledges, are clarity of the original mind. Embodiments and knowledges merged without resistance. They respond to people. They respond to people, freely adapting in form. Deliberate practices are all random actions. Keeping steady is not true spirituality. With the subtle meaning clarified by the teacher, finally gone are messy names. The monk Chit Chong was a man from Kui Chi in Xin province. He had left home in childhood and was intent on seeking perception of essential nature. One day he visited and paid respects. The master asked him, where have you come from and what are you seeking? He replied, I recently went to White Park Mountain in Hong province, where I paid respects to Master Ta Tong and was taught the principle of realizing Buddhahood by seeing essential nature. I have not yet resolved my doubts, so I have come all this way to pay respects and humbly hope that the Master will be so compassionate as to guide me. The Master said, what did he have to say? Try to quote him. Chit Chong said, I was there for 3 months without having received any instruction, being eager for the teaching. One night, I went to the abbot's room and asked, What is the original nature of my mind? Ta Tong then said, do you see space? I replied, yes. He said, do you see space has any appearance? I replied, space has no form. What appearance does it have? He said, your original nature is like space. There is no thing that can be seen. This is called true seeing. There is no thing that can be known. This is called true knowing. It has no blue or yellow, long or short. Just see the purity of the original source, the complete illumination of the substance of awakeness. This is called realizing Buddhahood by seeing essential nature. It is called the knowledge and vision of the realized ones. Although I heard this explanation, I'm still not sure. Please teach me. The Master said, that teacher's explanation still maintains seeing and knowing. That's why you haven't fully understood. Now I'll teach you a verse. Not seeing anything maintains unseeing. It's much like floating clouds blocking the face of the sun. Not knowing anything keeps unknowing. It's like the vast sky producing lightning. When this knowing and seeing suddenly arise, you misapprehend them. What understanding have you of expedience? You should realize your own error instantly. Your own spiritual light will always be manifest. When he had heard the verse, Chichang's mind was open. Then he uttered a verse, saying, pointlessly producing knowledge and views, I sought enlightenment attached to forms. When feelings retain a single thought of realization, how can one transcend previous illusions? Our own nature is the actual source of awakening. Following perception, one vainly shifts in the flow. Had I not entered the great master's room, I would have headed 2 ways at a loss. One day Chichang asked the master, the Buddha expounded the teachings of 3 vehicles, yet also spoke of the highest vehicle. I still don't understand. Please instruct me. The master said, observe your own original mind. Don't cling to the appearance of external things. There are no 4 vehicles in truth, but human minds have differences of level. Seeing, hearing, reading, and reciting are the smallest vehicle. Understanding the teaching and solving the meanings is the middling vehicle. Cultivating conduct in accord with the teaching is the great vehicle. Penetrating the truths, encompassing all realities, undefiled by everything, detached from the appearances of all things, not grasping at anything at all, is called the supreme vehicle. Vehicle means going. It is not a matter of verbal argument. You should practice on your own. Don't ask me. At all times, your own essential nature is as is of itself. Chichang bowed in thanks and attended the master for the rest of his life. The monk Chitao was a man from Nanhai in Quang province, asking for help. He said, ever since leaving home, I have been reading the Nirvana Sutra. It has been more than 10 years, but I still have not understood the great meaning. Please instruct me. The master said, on which point are you unclear? He said, all events are impermanent. They are things that arise and perish. When arising and perishing have died out, the quiescent extinction is bliss. When arising and perishing have died out, quiescent extinction is bliss. I am perplexed about this. The master said, how are you perplexed? He said, all living things have 2 bodies, known as the physical body and the reality body. The physical body is impermanent. It has birth and it has death. The reality body is permanent. It has no knowledge and no consciousness. When the sutra says, when arising and perishing have died out, quiescent extinction is bliss, I wonder which body is quiescent and extinct, and which body experiences bliss. If it is the material body, when the material body dies out, the gross elements disintegrate. This is completely miserable. and misery cannot be called bliss. If the reality body is quiescent and extinct, it is the same as grasses and trees, tile and stone. Who is to experience bliss? Furthermore, the nature of things is the substance of birth and death, while the 5 clusters, aggregates, heaps, clumps are the function of birth and death. One substance has 5 functions. Birth and death are eternal. Birth is initiation of functions from substance. Death is withdrawal from functions back into the substance. If allowed to be born again, then the category of sentient beings will never be ended or die out. If not allowed to be born again, they wind up extinct forever, same as inanimate objects. Thus all things are stopped by nirvana. Since one does not even get to live, how can there be bliss? The Master said, "You are a Buddhist. How can you discuss the teachings of the Supreme Vehicle in terms of heretical, perverted views of nihilism and eternalism? According to what you say, there is a separate reality body outside the physical body. You seek quiescent extinction apart from life and death. Also, you suppose the eternal bliss of nirvana is a physical experience. This is attachment to life and death. Also, you suppose the eternal bliss of nirvana is a physical experience. This is attachment to life and death. Obsession with worldly pleasure. You should know that Buddha took pity and pointed out the true bliss of nirvana, because all confused people take the combination of the 5 clusters to be the form of their own being. Discriminate all phenomena as the form of external matter, like life and dislike death, shift and flow from thought to thought. Do not know the unreality of dreams and illusions, vainly get caught up in the various circles. Think of eternally blissful nirvana as painful, and spend their days in frantic seeking. There is no sign of origination in an instant, and there is no sign of passing away in an instant. With no more birth and death to be extinguished, quiescent extinction thus manifests, as it is manifesting. Furthermore, there is no quantification or objectification of manifestation, so it is called eternal and blissful. This bliss has no subject that experiences it, yet there is none who does not experience it. How can there be the term 5 functions of one substance? Indeed, how can you go on to say nirvana stops everything, so nothing ever occurs? This is slandering Buddha and reviling the teaching. Listen to my verse. Great nirvana unexcelled is complete illumination. Always silently shining, ordinary fools call it death. Heretics call it annihilation. People who seek the 2 vehicles give it the name non-construction. All belong to intellectual calculations. The root of the 62 views, if you arbitrarily set up unreal names. What constitutes real true meaning? Only people beyond measure comprehend without grasping or rejecting, pushing or shoving. By knowing the phenomena of the 5 aggregates, clusters, heaps, clumps, and the self within the clusters, they outwardly manifest a multitude of physical forms. Each and every voice is equal, like dreams or illusions. They do not conceive the ideas of ordinary or holy, and do not make an understanding of nirvana. The 2 extremes and 3 times cut off, they always respond with the functions of the senses, yet do not conceive the notion of function. They distinguish all things without conceiving discriminatory ideas. The aeonic fire burns the ocean floors. The wind knocks the mountains together. The true, eternal, quiescent, and blissful characteristics of nirvana are like this. I am now forcing an explanation to get you to give up false views. Don't interpret me literally. and I'll admit you know a little bit." Hearing this verse, Chitao was greatly enlightened. Overjoyed, he paid respects and withdrew. Chan Master Sing Su was born to the Liu clan in Anchang in Qi province. Hearing that the teaching activity at Cao Qi was flourishing, he went there directly to visit and pay respects. Eventually he asked, "What should one do so as not to fall into ranks and grades?" The master said, "What have you done?" He replied, "I don't even work on the holy truths." The master said, "If you don't even work on the holy truths, what ranks or grades are there?" The master deeply respected him as a vessel of the teaching and had Sing Su lead the congregation. One day the master said to him, "You will dispense the teaching over a whole region, not letting it die out." Once Sing Su had attained the teaching, he returned to Qi province to Mount Qingyuan, where he spread the teaching, continuing its influence. He was posthumously entitled Chan Master of Universal Salvation. Chan Master Hui-neng was an offspring of the Tu clan of Qin province. He first called on national teacher An at Mount Sung, and An sent him to Cao Qi to seek enlightenment. When he got there, he paid respects. The master said, "Where have you come from?" He said, "Mount Sung." The master said, "What thing has come thus?" He said, "To speak of it as a thing is to miss it." The master said, "Can it be cultivated and realized?" He said, "It's not that there is no cultivation and realization, but it won't do to be obsessed." The master said, "This non-obsession is just what all Buddhas keep in mind. You are thus, and I too am thus." In India, Prajnatara predicted that a cult would emerge from your company and trample everyone in the world to death. The fulfillment is in your mind. You ought not be quick to preach. Hui-neng understood clearly and ultimately spent 15 years attending the master, attaining the profundities of mysticism day by day. He was posthumously entitled Chan Master of Great Insight. Chan Master Sun Chiao of Yongqia was an offspring of the Tai clan of Wen province. He had studied scriptures and treatises when he was young, and he was well versed in the Tiantai teaching of stopping and seeing. He discovered the ground of mind as he read the Vimalakirti Sutra. He happened to meet the master's disciple, Sun Tse, who visited him and engaged him in intense discussion. The words he spoke spontaneously agreed with the Grand Masters of Ch'an, and Sun Tse said, "Who is the teacher from whom you got the teaching?" He said, "I heard the scriptures and treatises each from a particular teacher. Later I realized the source of Buddhahood from the Vimalakirti Sutra. As yet, there has been no one to corroborate it." Sun Tse said, "Before the prehistoric Buddhas, you've gotten but self-enlightenment without a teacher. After the prehistoric Buddhas is all naturalistic deviation." He said, "Please be my witness." Sun Tse said, "My word carries no weight. In Cao Qi, there is the great teacher who is the sixth Grand Master. Those who gather in droves from the four quarters are all recipients of the teaching. If you go there, I'll go with you." Sun Chiao finally came along with Sun Tse to call on the master. Circling the master 3 times, he shook his ringed staff and stood there. The master said, "A Sramana embodies 3,000 dignified manners and 8 myriad refinements of behavior. Where do you come from, great worthy, to be so conceited?" Sun Chiao said, "Life and death is a grave matter. Impermanence is swift." The master said, "Why do you not realize there is no birth and comprehend there is no speed?" He said, "Realization itself has no birth. Comprehension basically has no speed." The master said, "That is so, that is so." Now Sun Chiao finally paid respects to the master formally. with every courtesy and then took his leave a moment later. The master said, "Isn't this too speedy after all?" He said, "Fundamentally, I am not in movement myself. How could there be speed?" The master said, "Who is aware of not being in movement?" He said, "You are producing discrimination yourself." The master said, "You have certainly gotten the intent of non-conception." He said, "If there is no conception, how can there be any intent?" The master said, "If there is no intent, who will discriminate?" He said, "Discrimination itself is not an intent." The master said, "Good. Stay here at least one night." In those days he was called the Overnight Enlightened One. Later he wrote a song on realization of the way which became popular. He was posthumously entitled Great Master of the Formless, and in his time he was called Chen Qiao, truly awakened. The Ch'an devotee Che Huang first studied with the 5th Grand Master. Thinking he had already attained true experience, he lived in a hermitage and sat for 20 years. When the master's disciple Zhongzhe came to Hope in the course of his travels, he heard Che Huang going to his hermitage. He asked, "What are you doing here?" Che Huang said, "Entering stabilization." Zhongzhe said, "You say you are entering stabilization. Are you entering it mindfully or mindlessly? If you are entering mindlessly, then all inanimate objects should attain stabilization. If you are entering mindfully, then all sentient beings and conscious beings must attain stabilization." Che Huang said, "When I am entering stabilization, I do not see the existence of mindfulness or mindlessness." Zhongzhe said, "If you do not see the existence of mindfulness or mindlessness, then this is constant stability. How can there be exit and entry? If there is exit and entry, this is not great stability." Che Huang had no reply. After a long silence, he asked, "Whose successor are you?" Zhongzhe said, "My master is the 6th Grand Master at Cao Chi." Che Huang said, "What does the 6th Grand Master make out to be meditative stabilization?" Zhongzhe said, "What my teacher speaks of is subtle tranquility, perfectly serene, with substance and function conforming to being as is. The 5 clusters are fundamentally empty. The 6 fields of sense data are not existent. There is essentially no dwelling in meditation. It is apart from dwelling in meditative stillness. There is essentially no conception in meditation. It is apart from conceiving ideas of meditation. The mind is like space, yet without any notion of space." Having heard this explanation, Che Huang went directly to call on the master. The master asked him where he had come from, and Che Huang related the foregoing events in full. The master said, "Truly it is as you were told. Just let your mind be like space without clinging to a mental image or of space, functioning responsively without obstruction, unminding in action and repose. Feelings of ordinary and wholly forgotten. Subject and object both submerged, nature and form are as is. At no time are you unstable." At this, Che Huang was greatly enlightened. The sense of attainment he had for 20 years disappeared without a shadow or an echo. That night, the gentry and common folk of Hope heard a voice in the sky saying, "Meditation Master Che Huang has attained enlightenment this day." Che Huang later respectfully took leave and returned to Hope, where he taught monks, nuns, and lay people. One monk asked the master, "Who gets the message of Huang Mei?" The master said, "Someone who understands Buddhism." The monk said, "Do you get it?" The master said, "I don't understand Buddhism." One day the master wanted to wash the robe that had been handed down to him, but there was no good spring, so he went a few miles beyond the monastery, where he saw the mountain forest, dense and luxuriant, with an auspicious atmosphere over it. The master stuck his staff into the ground, and spring welled forth, accumulating up into a pond. Then the master knelt and washed the robe. Suddenly a monk showed up on the rocks. He bowed and said, I am Feng Pian, a man of Western Shu. Yesterday I saw the great Master Bodhidharma in South India. He told me, go quickly to China. The treasury of the eye of true teaching and the vestment I inherited from Mahakasyapa have been transmitted through 6 generations to Cao Chi in Shao province. Go and see him. I have come a long way, so please show me the robe you inherited. The master showed it to him, then asked, what work do you do? Feng Pian said, I am an expert sculptor. The master said, try to make an image of me. Feng Pian was at a loss, but after several days his sculpture was done, a lifelike image about 7 inches tall with extremely fine detail. When he showed it to the master laughed and said, you understand the nature of image making, but not the nature of Buddhahood. Then the master reached out, patted Feng Pian on the head, and said, always be a field of blessing for humankind and the spirits. A monk quoted a verse of Ch'an Master Wo Lun. Wo Lun has a skill, cutting off 100 thoughts. When mind is not aroused in the face of objects, enlightenment grows day by day. When the master heard this, he said, this verse does not yet clarify the ground of mind. If you put it into practice, that will add to your bondage. Accordingly, he taught a verse that said, Hui-neng has no skill, does not cut off 100 thoughts. In face of objects, mind is aroused again and again. How can enlightenment grow?